The time on my laptop read 11:42 in the evening. Outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, the Miami skyline was a blur of humidity and neon, but my focus was entirely on the blueprints for the Azure Coast project spread across my dining table. I was calculating load-bearing tolerances for the third tower when my phone lit up against the glass surface. It was a text from my father, Robert, the CEO of Sterling Heights Group. I picked it up, expecting a question about the steel shipment delayed in the port. Instead, the message was short, brutal, and devoid of any professional courtesy. We decided to go in a different direction. Your negativity is stifling Ashley's vision. We no longer trust you. Don't come to the site tomorrow. I stared at the screen. I waited for the familiar tightness in my chest, the panic, the desperate need to call him and explain that without my negativity, the Azure Coast towers would literally collapse into the Atlantic. But the panic didn't come. For 10 years, I had been the invisible steel skeleton holding up the glittering facade of my family's empire. I fixed the permits Ashley ignored. I balanced the budgets she blew on champagne launches. I kept them legal. I kept them rich. And in one text, they decided they didn't need the skeleton anymore. They just wanted the facade. I didn't cry. I didn't type out a paragraph defending my loyalty. I didn't feel sad. I felt a sudden, icy clarity. The transaction was over. My fingers moved steadily over the keypad. I typed a single word. Understood. I hit send. I closed my laptop. And for the first time in a decade, I poured myself a glass of water and sat in absolute silence. They thought they were firing an employee. They didn't realize they were pulling the pin on a grenade. Drop a comment below. What's the most unprofessional way you've ever been let go or betrayed by someone you trusted? I want to hear your stories. The digital clock on the dashboard glowed 2 in the morning. The streets of Miami were empty, slick with the humidity that never really left the air, even at night. I drove toward the financial district, my hands steady on the wheel. Most people, when fired by their own father via text message, might spiral. They might drink. They might call their sister screaming. I was doing something far more dangerous. I was going to work. I pulled into the Sterling Heights underground garage. My keycard still worked. Robert hadn't thought to deactivate it yet. He probably assumed I was at home, crying into a pillow, wondering how I'd pay my rent without the family stipend. He forgot that I was the one who set up the security protocols. The elevator ride to the 30th floor was silent. When the door slid open, the office was a tomb of glass and chrome. I walked past the reception desk, past the framed awards for Developer of the Year that Ashley had accepted in couture gowns, and straight to my office. I didn't turn on the main lights. The glow of my monitors was enough. I sat down and logged in. My access was still administrator level. I opened the central server. For 5 years, my job had essentially been to act as a human shield for Ashley's incompetence. She called herself a visionary. I called her a liability. Every time she approved a vendor who didn't exist, or ordered materials that never arrived, or pulled cash for consulting fees that looked suspiciously like spa retreats in Tulum, I caught it. I didn't report it. I fixed it. I moved the messy, illegal files into a secure, encrypted folder marked pending reconciliation, a digital purgatory where I could quietly balance the books using my own bonuses or by negotiating discounts with legitimate vendors to cover the shortfall. I cleaned the crime scene before the auditors ever saw the blood. Tonight, I wasn't cleaning. I was putting the blood back on the walls. I opened the pending folder. There they were, hundreds of invoices. Consulting fees to companies with no tax IDs. Orders for Italian marble that were billed but never shipped. Wire transfers to accounts in the Caymans. I selected them all. With a few clicks, I moved every single one of Ashley's raw, fraudulent transactions into the active/audit-ready folder. I didn't fabricate a single document. I didn't plant evidence. I simply removed the filter. I took away the safety net I had woven to keep my family out of prison. Then I deleted my own spreadsheets, the ones that made the math work, the ones that explained away the discrepancies as logistical delays or accounting errors. I wiped the explanations. Now the files told the truth. And the truth was a felony. The next quarterly audit was in 3 weeks. Without me there to guide the auditors, to distract them with coffee and charm and complicated Excel formulas, they would open the active folder. And they would find $15 million missing. It took me 45 minutes to dismantle 5 years of protection. When the progress bar hit 100%, I stood up. I took my company phone out of my purse and set it on the desk. I placed the Audi key fob next to it. I didn't leave a note. A note would imply there was still a conversation to be had. I took the elevator down. I walked out of the building and into the heavy, wet heat of the night. I hailed a cab on Brickell Avenue. As I watched the Sterling Heights Tower recede in the rear window, a fortress of glass built on a foundation of lies, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't guilt. It was the deep, quiet satisfaction of a demolition expert who has just cut the red wire. They wanted Ashley's vision. They were about to get it, unfiltered and unadulterated. I spent the next 3 days in my apartment, sleeping in late and drinking coffee on my balcony, watching the sun bake the city. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't check my email. I just sat there and let the silence wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a crisis. My friends used to tell me I was lucky. They saw the Sterling Heights Instagram feed, the launch parties on yachts, the ribbon-cutting ceremonies where Ashley wore silk gowns and held oversized scissors, the articles in design magazines praising her visionary approach to modern living. They thought I lived in that world too. They didn't know that while Ashley was clinking champagne glasses with potential investors at midnight, I was usually standing in a muddy construction site at 4 a.m, arguing with a foreman about a failed electrical inspection. My title was Vice President of Operations. My actual job was professional janitor. I cleaned up the messes Ashley made before our parents ever smelled the rot. I remember the marble incident last year. It was the centerpiece of the Valencia project, a lobby that had to scream opulence. Ashley insisted on Calicata gold marble, imported directly from a specific quarry in Italy. She bypassed our approved vendors because she said they lacked soul. She found a supplier on Instagram who promised her exclusivity. She wired them $200,000 of company money without a contract. The marble never arrived. The supplier ghosted her. The quarry had been closed for 5 years. When she came to me, she wasn't sorry. She was annoyed. She told me that the universe was blocking her creativity. If I had told our father, Robert, that his genius daughter had been scammed by a bot on social media, the illusion of her competence would have cracked. And in my family, the illusion was more important than the bottom line. So I fixed it. I called in a favor with a legitimate supplier in Georgia who had a surplus of high-grade stone. I paid the rush shipping fees out of my own pocket. I negotiated a discount on the books to hide the $200,000 hole, covering the rest with my year-end performance bonus. The lobby opened on time. Ashley took credit for this stunning natural stone. My father toasted her eye for detail. I stood in the back, drinking sparkling water, knowing I had just paid $250,000 to buy my sister a round of applause. Sitting on my balcony, I finally asked myself the question I had avoided for a decade. Why? Why did I stay? Why did I keep writing checks for a family that treated me like an overhead cost? In economics, there is a concept called the sunk cost fallacy. It is the tendency to continue investing in a losing proposition, whether it is a business, a war, or a relationship, simply because you have already invested so much. You tell yourself that if you just put in a little more money, a little more time, or a little more love, you will eventually break even. You refuse to walk away because walking away means admitting that everything you spent up to that point was wasted. I realized then that I had treated my family like a failing stock. I kept pouring my energy, my talent, and my dignity into the void, waiting for the market to turn. I thought if I just saved them one more time, if I just fixed one more disaster, the value would go up. They would finally see me. They would finally love me. But the market never turns for a scam. The text from my father, firing me for negativity, wasn't a tragedy. It was a market correction. It forced me to stop throwing good money after bad. I wasn't losing a family. I was cutting my losses. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted better than any champagne I had ever drunk at a Sterling Heights gala. I was unemployed. I was alone. But for the first time in my life, I was in the black. 7 days after I walked out of Sterling Heights, I was sitting in a leased office space 3 miles down the coast, watching my former life decompose through the glow of a retina display. I didn't block them on social media. A good architect always monitors the structural integrity of the building, even if she's waiting for it to collapse. Ashley had posted a photo on the company Instagram an hour ago. It was a staged shot of her sitting in the CEO's chair, my father's chair, wearing a white power suit, her feet propped up on the mahogany desk. She held a glass of champagne. The caption read, "Trimming the fat. Entering a new era of pure vision at Sterling Heights. No more negativity. Just the sky." I scrolled to the comments. My mother, Susan, was the first to reply. "Finally letting the stars shine. So proud of you, sweetie. The clouds are gone." I was the fat. I was the negativity. I was the cloud. It was a masterclass in narrative control. To the outside world, my departure was a strategic pivot, a shedding of dead weight to allow the company to soar. Ashley was selling the fantasy that she had been held back by my caution, rather than propped up by my competence. Then came the email from my father. The subject line was all caps, "Company property. Final warning. Olivia, if the keys to the Audi are not returned to the front desk by noon today, I will be filing a police report for grand theft auto. Do not test me." It was 10 in the morning. I read the email twice, feeling a detached sense of pity. I hadn't driven the Audi since the night I left. The keys were sitting exactly where I had left them, on the corner of my desk, right next to the company phone he was probably using to type this email. He hadn't even looked. He hadn't bothered to walk into my office to check. He just wanted to threaten me. He wanted to exert power because he sensed, subconsciously, that he had lost it. I didn't reply. I didn't tell him where the keys were. I let him rage into the void. If he called the police, they would find the keys in the office, and he would look like a senile fool. I closed the tab. The personal attacks were irrelevant. The real story was happening in the accounts payable department. I knew the rhythm of Sterling Heights better than my own heartbeat. I knew that on the 15th of the month, the invoices for the structural steel at the Azure Coast site were due. The supplier, a no-nonsense man named Miller, had a strict policy. Net 30 days, no exceptions. If the wire didn't hit his account by 5 p.m., the trucks stopped rolling. For 5 years, I had personally authorized that wire. I made sure Miller got paid before the electricity bill, before the marketing budget, before anything else. Because without steel, you don't have a building. You just have a hole in the ground. Today was the 22nd. I poured myself a coffee and looked out at the rain streaking the window. I didn't need a spy to know what was happening. Right now, a foreman was standing in the mud at the Azure Coast site, screaming into a radio because the flatbeds hadn't arrived. The cranes were sitting idle, burning thousands of dollars an hour in rental fees. And in the boardroom, Ashley was likely spinning a story. She would tell Robert and Susan that the delay was my fault. She would say I left the files in disarray, that I sabotaged the vendor relationships, that these were just growing pains of the transition. And they would believe her. They would believe her because the alternative was admitting that their golden child didn't know the difference between a purchase order and a permit application. They would believe the lie because the lie felt like love. They preferred the comfortable fiction of my incompetence to the terrifying reality of her fraud. They were celebrating the view from the penthouse while the fires were already burning in the basement. 3 weeks after I left, the quarterly audit began. I wasn't there, but I knew the procedure by heart. A team of gray-suited auditors from Deloitte would arrive at 8 in the morning. They would set up in the conference room. They would ask for coffee. And then they would ask for access to the server. Usually, I would have been there to greet them. I would have handed them a curated flash drive containing the sanitized files, the clean versions where the missing millions were hidden under vague headings like R&D or marketing retainers. I would have walked them through the spreadsheets, distracting them with charm and complex projections until they signed off on the compliance forms. But today, the only person greeting them was Ashley. And Ashley didn't know a pivot table from a hole in the ground. At 10 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Marcus, a contact I had at the bank that held our construction loans. Olivia, he said, his voice low and urgent. I shouldn't be calling you, but the feds just froze the Sterling Heights accounts. I leaned back in my chair, watching the rain run down the window of my new office. Why? I asked, though I already knew. The auditors found a $15 million discrepancy in the active files, Marcus said. It wasn't even hidden. It was just sitting there. Invoices for steel that never existed. Transfers to shell companies with addresses that trace back to P.O. boxes in the Bahamas. It looks like someone just stopped trying to hide it. I see, I said calmly. Did you know about this? He asked. Because your signature isn't on any of the recent approvals. It's all Ashley. I haven't worked there in weeks, Marcus. Check the timestamps on the files. I was fired before those reconciliations were due. There was a pause. Okay, good. Because this is bad, Olivia. It's not just embezzlement. It's fraud. And money laundering. I understand. There's something else, he added, his voice dropping even lower. The loans. They weren't just secured against the project assets. I frowned. What do you mean? The Azure Coast site was the collateral. Not just the site. The loan documents were amended 6 months ago to increase the line of credit, to cover the overruns. The additional collateral listed, it's your parents' personal estate, the mansion in Coral Gables, their retirement accounts, everything. I froze. Ashley brought in the paperwork, Marcus continued. It had Robert and Susan's signatures on it. We assumed they knew, but looking at this mess now, Olivia, if those signatures are forged. The room seemed to tilt. Ashley hadn't just stolen from the company. She had stolen the safety net. She had forged our parents' signatures to bet their entire lives on her lie. Thank you for telling me, Marcus, I said. I hung up. I stared at the wall. I had known about the $15 million. I had known the business would collapse. But I hadn't known she had mortgaged their home. I hadn't known she had spent their retirement. The news broke an hour later. Sterling Heights Group under federal investigation. The headlines were brutal. Luxury developer accused of massive fraud. Where did the money go? Then a notification popped up on my laptop. A flight alert I still had active for the company credit card. Ticket confirmed. MIA to CUN Cancun. One way. Passenger, Ashley Sterling. She was running. She was going to Tulum, to her wellness retreat, hoping to disappear into a cloud of incense and non-extradition treaties before the handcuffs clicked. But she had forgotten one thing. The company credit cards were frozen. I checked the status. Transaction declined. She was stuck at the airport. The walls were closing in, and for the first time in her life, there was no one there to hold them back. A tropical storm hit Miami that afternoon. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the rain came down in sheets, turning the streets into rivers. I sat in my new office, a modest space in a shared workspace building, listening to the thunder shake the glass. My phone had been silent all day. No more threats. No more emails about stolen cars. The silence of people who finally realized the gun was empty. Then came the knocking. It wasn't a polite rap on the door. It was a frantic, violent pounding. I didn't get up immediately. I finished the email I was writing to a new client. Then, slowly, I walked over and unlocked the door. They spilled into the room like refugees from a shipwreck. Robert, Susan, and Ashley. They were soaked. The umbrella Ashley was clutching was inside out, broken by the wind. Robert's Italian suit was dark with water, clinging to his frame, making him look frail. Susan's hair, usually lacquered into a perfect helmet, was plastered to her skull. And Ashley, the golden child, the visionary. She looked feral. Her makeup was running down her face in black streaks. She was shivering, but not from the cold. From rage. Fix this, Robert said. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He just barked an order, but his voice cracked. Call the auditors. Tell them it was a filing error. Tell them you moved the files by mistake. I leaned against my desk, crossing my arms. I can't do that, Robert. I don't work for Sterling Heights anymore. Remember? You fired me. They're taking the house, Susan sobbed. She collapsed into the single guest chair, water pooling around her expensive shoes. The agents came to the door, Olivia. They put a notice on the gate. They froze our personal accounts. We can't even buy groceries. She looked at me, her eyes wide and terrified. We signed those loan documents because Ashley said it was a formality. She said the company was stronger than ever. She said you were just being difficult. I looked at Ashley. She wasn't crying. She was vibrating. She stepped toward me, her hands curled into claws. You did this, she screamed. You set me up. You left those files there on purpose. You knew they would look. I watched her, fascinated. In psychology, there is a concept called the narcissistic collapse. It happens when the grandiose false self is shattered by reality. When a narcissist is cornered, they don't feel remorse. They don't reflect on their actions. They feel a profound, violent sense of injury. They don't grieve the loss of the relationship. They grieve the loss of their control. Ashley wasn't sorry she had stolen $15 million. She wasn't sorry she had bankrupted our parents. She was furious that the mirror had broken. I didn't set you up, Ashley, I said, my voice level. I just stopped cleaning up after you. Those were your files. Your invoices. Your signatures. I just let the world see your work. You're jealous, she shrieked. You've always been jealous. You wanted to destroy me. For the first time, Robert and Susan didn't rush to comfort her. They stared at their golden child, and I saw the realization dawn on them. They saw the monster. They saw the selfishness that had devoured their retirement, their home, and their legacy. They realized that while they were praising her vision, she was picking their pockets. Olivia, please, Robert said, his bluster gone. He sounded old. We're family. You can't let us end up on the street. You're the only one who knows how the books work. You can find a loophole. There's always a loophole. I looked at them. 3 wet, desperate people standing in a rented office, asking me to commit a felony to save them from the consequences of their own arrogance. I could have yelled. I could have listed every time they humiliated me, every time they chose Ashley's lies over my truth. I could have screamed about the negativity text. But I didn't. I used silence. I let the silence stretch out between us, heavy and suffocating. I let them hear the rain hitting the window. I let them feel the weight of my refusal without me having to speak it. Silence is a weapon. When you explain yourself, you give away power. You imply that your decision is up for negotiation. When you stay silent, you become a wall. Robert shifted uncomfortably. Susan wept softly into her hands. Ashley's breathing hitched. They were waiting for me to fix it because I had always fixed it. I opened my desk drawer. I pulled out a business card I had kept for this exact moment. I walked over to Robert and pressed it into his hand. This is the number for a bankruptcy attorney. He's the best in Miami. He can help you navigate the liquidation of your personal assets. Robert stared at the card. That's it? That's all you have to say? I have a business to run, I said softly. And you're dripping on my floor. Please leave. I walked to the door and held it open. Ashley let out a sound of pure frustration, stomping past me into the hallway. Susan followed, looking like a ghost. Robert paused at the threshold. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. He didn't see the negativity anymore. He saw the person who had kept him rich. And he saw that she was gone. He walked out. I closed the door. I locked it. And then I went back to work. 6 months later, the sign came down. I watched from the street as a crane lowered the massive, gold-plated letters spelling Sterling Heights from the facade of the downtown headquarters. They didn't look majestic anymore. They looked like scrap metal. The liquidation was complete. The courts had seized everything. The mansion in Coral Gables was sold at auction to pay off the construction loans. My father's vintage car collection, my mother's jewelry, the art on the walls, all gone to satisfy the creditors Ashley had lied to. They live in a 2-bedroom rental apartment in Hialeah now. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Robert spends his days staring at the television, and Susan refuses to leave the house because she's afraid of running into someone from the country club. Ashley is awaiting trial. She's out on bail, but her passport is gone, and her assets are frozen. She posts vague, angry quotes about betrayal and fake people on social media, but the likes have dried up. The audience has moved on to the next spectacle. As for the Azure Coast project, it didn't die. The investors called me a week after the audit. They didn't want the sterling name. They wanted the person who knew where the bodies were buried. They wanted the person who knew the load-bearing tolerances of the third tower. My new consulting firm took over the contract. We finished the project on time and under budget. I walked through the completed lobby this morning. The floors are Italian marble from a fake quarry. They are high-grade, locally sourced limestone.
Solid. Real. Paid for.
I ran my hand along the wall. It felt cold and permanent. There is a peace that comes with knowing exactly what is holding the roof up. I know there are people out there, maybe you're one of them, who are still standing in the mud, holding up a family that is crumbling on top of you. You tell yourself that if you just work harder, if you just forgive one more time, you can save them. You tell yourself that leaving is a failure. But I'm writing this to tell you that leaving is not a failure. It is a structural necessity. You are not a support beam for a rotting house. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they are the ones holding the matches. We are taught that loyalty is the highest virtue. But loyalty to a lie is just complicity. It hurts to walk away. It hurts to be the villain in their story. It hurts to watch them fall when you know you could have caught them. But gravity is a law of nature. If the foundation is rotten, the collapse is inevitable. You can't fight gravity. You can only decide whether you're going to be inside the building when it falls. I walked out to my car. The Miami sun was bright, reflecting off the glass of the tower I had built. I didn't look back at the empty space where the Sterling sign used to be. I started the engine. I had a meeting with a new client in 20 minutes. I had a business to run. I drove away, finally, completely free. If you've ever had to burn a bridge to stop yourself from drowning, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about rebuilding from the ashes. You are not alone.